The afternoon sun bore down mercilessly on the crowded streets of Dallas, shimmering off glass skyscrapers and turning the sidewalks into scorching plates of heat. Among the sea of hurried professionals and distracted tourists stood a small boy named Lucas, clutching a worn basket filled with neatly wrapped candies. Barely 9 years old, his small frame seemed too fragile for the weight of his burden. Lucas's mission was simple yet heartbreaking: selling enough candy to buy medicine for his sick mother, Grace. Her illness had worsened, leaving her bedridden in their tiny apartment. Despite her pleas for him to stay home, Lucas had insisted, driven by a sense of responsibility far beyond his years. What neither Lucas nor Grace knew was that this day would change their lives forever. It was on this sweltering street corner that Lucas would cross paths with Daniel Carter, a man whose life was about to take an unexpected turn. The streets of Dallas buzzed with their usual rhythm: honking horns, hurried footsteps, and the occasional call of a street vendor. Lucas stood on the corner of Main and Elm, his sneakers worn thin and barely protecting his feet from the heat of the pavement. His small hands clutched the handle of a tattered basket filled with candy bars. Beads of sweat trickled down his forehead, but his focus remained on the passing crowd. "Candy, sir? Just $1, Lucas called out to a man in a crisp suit, his voice steady despite the rejections piling up. The man didn't stop, waving Lucas off with a distracted gesture as he continued talking into his phone. Lucas sighed, the weight of the basket growing heavier with each step he took. Around him, the world moved on without pause. Business people glanced at their watches, couples strolled past with iced coffees in hand, and children laughed as they raced by, carefree in a way Lucas couldn't afford to be. He stepped toward a woman in heels, her perfume mingling briefly with the dusty city air. "Candy, ma'am?" he asked, his voice tinged with quiet hope. She barely glanced at him, clutching her purse tighter as though his small frame posed a threat. Lucas didn't let the rejections break him. His shoulders straightened as he turned back to the endless wave of pedestrians. Every dollar he earned was for one purpose: buying the medication his mother desperately needed. In their small apartment on the outskirts of the city, Grace lay on a lumpy mattress pushed against the wall. The dim room smelled faintly of damp plaster, and the broken ceiling fan spun lazily overhead. A harsh cough racked her frail body, leaving her breathless. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest, willing the pain to subside. Grace had begged Lucas not to go out today. She hated seeing her son take on so much, but his determination always won. "I'll be back soon, Mama. Rest, okay?" Lucas had whispered before kissing her forehead and leaving with his candy basket. As the hours dragged on, Lucas's feet began to ache and his stomach growled. He ignored the hunger, his focus unyielding. He spotted a group of kids playing in the nearby park, their laughter echoing through the streets. For a brief moment, Lucas hesitated, his gaze lingering on their carefree smiles. But he quickly looked away, gripping the basket tighter. There was no time for games. By the time the sun began to dip, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Lucas had sold just enough to scrape together a few crumpled bills. His feet were blistered and his body ached, but he trudged home, holding on to the thought of his mother's relief when he handed her the money. When Lucas opened the apartment door, the dim light revealed his mother still lying on the mattress, her breaths shallow and uneven. "Did you sell much today, sweetheart?" Grace asked weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas knelt beside her, pulling out a few crumpled bills and coins. "Enough to get your medicine tomorrow," he said with a forced smile, hiding the blisters on his heels and the rejections he had endured. Grace's trembling hand stroked his cheek, her eyes glistening with pride and guilt. "You're so strong," she murmured. "Stronger than I'll ever be." Suddenly, Grace's chest tightened and her breath became more labored. Her hand slipped from Lucas's cheek, falling limply onto the mattress. "Mom?" Lucas's voice cracked with panic, his small hands trembling as he shook her gently. Tears welled in his eyes as he whispered, "Please, wake up." Grace didn't respond. Without wasting a second, Lucas grabbed an empty water bottle and ran out the door, his small feet pounding against the pavement. "Help! Someone please help!" he screamed, his voice cutting through the noise of the bustling city. A kind stranger finally stopped, rushing over to Lucas. After hearing his desperate pleas, they helped call an ambulance and stayed by his side as paramedics arrived. Lucas clung to Grace's frail hand as they loaded her into the ambulance, his small frame trembling with fear. The hospital was cold and sterile, a sharp contrast to the humid Dallas streets. Lucas followed the paramedics as they wheeled Grace into the emergency room. At the reception desk, a nurse handed him a clipboard. "Fill this out and wait," she said flatly. Lucas's hands fumbled with the pen, his small fingers barely able to grip it. The medical forms were overwhelming, the words blurring together as tears pricked his eyes. When a doctor finally appeared, his expression hardened at the sight of Grace's worn clothes and Lucas's candy-stained shirt. "We'll need payment up front for any tests," the doctor said briskly, handing Lucas a paper with a staggering cost scribbled on it. "I'll get the money," Lucas said, clutching his candy box tighter. His voice was steady, but his heart was breaking. As the streetlights flickered to life, casting a soft glow over the Dallas evening, Lucas stood outside the hospital clutching his candy box. His small figure wove through groups of passers-by, his voice hoarse but determined. "Candy, just $1, he called out, though the exhaustion in his tone was unmistakable. Across the street, Daniel Carter stepped out of a sleek office building, loosening his tie as he exhaled deeply. The day had been long, and the weight of back-to-back meetings clung to him like a stubborn shadow. His polished shoes clicked against the pavement as he reached into his pocket, glancing briefly at a missed call from someone he didn't feel like calling back. As he crossed the street, his eyes landed on Lucas. Something about the boy's posture, yet yielding, yet fragile, caught his attention. Daniel paused, watching as Lucas approached a woman holding out a crumpled candy bar. "Just $1, ma'am," Lucas said. The woman shook her head and hurried away, her heels clicking as Lucas's shoulders sagged ever so slightly. Curiosity tugged at Daniel, and without fully understanding why, he stepped closer. "Hey, kid," he called out. Lucas turned, his wide brown eyes filled with a mix of weariness and hope. "You want some candy?" "Just $1, he said quickly, holding up the slightly squished chocolate bar. Daniel studied him for a moment, noting the grime on his face and the worn edges of his sneakers. "What are you doing out here so late?" he asked, his tone softer than he intended. Lucas hesitated, shifting on his feet. "Selling candy?" he answered, gripping the box tightly. "For my mom. She's sick and she's at the hospital now." Daniel's chest tightened at the boy's words. "Your mom's in there?" he asked, nodding toward the hospital. Lucas nodded quickly, his voice quieter now. "I need money for her medicine. They said I have to pay first." Something in the boy's voice, a mix of desperation and determination, stirred something deep within Daniel. He reached into his wallet, pulling out several bills. "How much for all of it?" he asked. Lucas's eyes widened. "All of it," he echoed, as if unsure he had heard correctly. Daniel nodded, handing him the money. Lucas fumbled with the candy bars, practically shoving them into Daniel's hands. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice trembling with relief. "Hold on," Daniel said, glancing toward the hospital. "Take me to your mom." Lucas froze, unsure if he could trust this stranger, but Daniel's steady gaze reassured him, and after a moment Lucas nodded. "Okay." As they walked toward the hospital, Daniel found himself glancing down at Lucas. There was a quiet resilience in the boy, a strength that reminded Daniel of a younger version of himself. As the hospital doors slid open, Daniel knew this was more than just a random act of kindness. This was something he couldn't walk away from. The sterile smell of the hospital hit Daniel as he followed Lucas through the sliding doors. The boy's small hand gripped the strap of his candy box tightly, his eyes darting nervously around the bustling emergency room. "He's over there," Lucas said softly, pointing to a curtained-off area. When they reached the bed, Daniel's gaze landed on Grace. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow, and her frail hands clutched the thin hospital blanket. She stirred at the sound of Lucas's voice, her eyes fluttering open. "Mom," Lucas said gently, climbing onto the chair beside her. "This is Mr. Daniel. He bought all my candy, and he came to help." Grace's eyes flicked toward Daniel, and the moment their gazes met, something shifted in the air. Her expression tensed, her fingers tightening on the blanket as if bracing herself against an unseen wave. Daniel frowned, studying her face. She looked familiar, though he couldn't quite place her. "Do I know you?" he asked cautiously, his voice low. Grace's lips parted, but no words came. Memories surged forward, unbidden and relentless. A rainy night 6 years ago, a disheveled man stumbling into a hotel lobby, and a fleeting connection that left a lasting mark. She never thought she would see him again. "It's nothing," Grace murmured, her voice trembling. She turned her attention to Lucas, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Did you sell a lot today, sweetheart?" Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, the sense of familiarity gnawing at him. "Wait," he said, his tone firmer now. "I do know you, don't I?" Grace hesitated, then exhaled shakily. She couldn't avoid the truth any longer. "That night, 6 years ago," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "At the hotel, I didn't know how to find you after, and then, Lucas..." Daniel's heart sank as her words trailed off. He looked at Lucas, the boy's features suddenly taking on a sharper clarity. The resemblance was undeniable. The eyes, the stubborn set of his jaw. "What are you saying?" Daniel asked, though he already knew the answer. Grace met his gaze, her voice steady despite the vulnerability in her eyes. "Lucas is your son." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Daniel froze, his mind racing to process what he had just heard. How can you be sure?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "I wouldn't tell you this if I wasn't certain," Grace replied firmly. Daniel exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. "I'll need to confirm," he said, his voice tight. Grace nodded, her expression resigned. "Do what you need to do." Daniel sat in the hospital waiting room, the DNA test results clutched in his hand. The words on the envelope, "paternity test results," felt heavier than they should. He had asked for the test with a calm resolve, but now, with the truth so close, his hands trembled slightly. Taking a deep breath, he tore open the envelope and scanned the contents. The results were undeniable. Lucas was his son. Daniel leaned back in the stiff hospital chair, exhaling as though the weight of the world had just settled on his chest. Relief, guilt, and disbelief churned within him. 6 years, a child's entire lifetime he had missed. He thought of Lucas's determined smile, Grace's frailty, and the sacrifices she must have made. Moments later, Daniel returned to Grace's hospital room. She was propped up against a stack of pillows, her exhaustion clear in her eyes, but she looked at him with quiet determination. Lucas sat at her bedside, drawing with crayons on a piece of scrap paper. "You've seen the results?" Grace said softly, her gaze steady. Daniel nodded, his voice quiet but firm. "He's my son." Grace's expression softened, though the lines of worry on her face remained. "I told you because you deserve to know," she said. "But more than that, Lucas needs someone who can give him what I can't anymore." Daniel knelt beside the bed, looking her in the eye. "I should have been there," he admitted, his voice filled with regret. "For you, for him. But I'm here now, and I'm not walking away." Tears welled in Grace's eyes, but she managed a faint smile. "That's all I ever wanted," she whispered. Lucas looked up from his drawing, his bright eyes curious. "What's going on?" he asked. Daniel reached out, resting a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "It means I'm not going anywhere, kid," he said warmly. "From now on, I'm here for both of you." Daniel's newfound determination to help Lucas and Grace did not come without challenges. Just days after the DNA results confirmed the truth, Brittany, his on-again, off-again girlfriend, began to notice the shift in his priorities. She grew suspicious of his frequent absences and the quiet determination that now replaced his usual charm. One evening, Brittany cornered Daniel in his living room. "You've been distant, Daniel," she said, her voice dripping with feigned concern. "Where are you running off to all the time?" Daniel hesitated, knowing this conversation was inevitable. "I've got responsibilities now," he said simply, avoiding her piercing gaze. "Responsibilities?" Brittany scoffed, crossing her arms. "Don't tell me this is about that kid and his mother. You can't seriously believe this is your problem." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Lucas isn't just some kid. He's my son," he said firmly. Brittany's face froze in disbelief, but her composure quickly gave way to anger. "You're gonna throw everything away for them? What about us?" "There is no us," Brittany, Daniel replied, his voice calm but resolute. Whatever we had, it's been gone for a long time. I just didn't see it until now. Brittany's lips twisted into a bitter smile. You're making a mistake, Daniel. You don't even know what you're getting yourself into with them. I know exactly what I'm doing, he said. I'm giving my son a chance at the life he deserves, and I won't let anyone get in the way of that. Unbeknownst to Daniel, Brittany wasn't ready to let go so easily. Driven by jealousy and desperation, she contacted Dr. Harris, a morally flexible physician overseeing Grace's care, and convinced him to make subtle changes to Grace's treatment, enough to delay her recovery. But Daniel's instincts kicked in when he noticed Grace's condition worsening despite following the prescribed treatment. After cornering Dr. Harris one evening, Daniel uncovered the truth. Brittany pressured me, the doctor admitted reluctantly. She paid me to slow things down. I didn't think it would harm her too much. Fury burned in Daniel's chest. You jeopardize someone's life for money? You'll answer for this, he growled. That same night, Daniel confronted Brittany, ending their toxic relationship once and for all. Stay out of my life, Brittany, he said coldly. You've done enough damage. With Brittany out of the picture, Daniel turned his full focus back to Grace and Lucas, vowing to protect them at all costs. The hospital room was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of morning sunlight filtering through the blinds. Grace rested against a stack of pillows, her cheeks still pale, but showing hints of color that hadn't been there in weeks. Her breathing was steadier now, no longer strained and shallow. Lucas sat beside her, swinging his legs from the chair as he proudly held up a new drawing. Look, Mom, it's us! Me, you, and Mr. Daniel. Grace smiled weakly, her eyes drifting over the bright crayon-streaked image. It's beautiful, sweetheart, she said softly, her gaze shifting to Daniel, who stood by the window. Daniel approached the bed, his expression warm but thoughtful. He's got talent, he said, crouching beside Lucas. Though I think he made my hair too gray. Lucas giggled. That's how it looks. The light-hearted moment was a reprieve from the hardships they'd endured. Daniel glanced at Grace, his voice softening. The doctors say you're improving. It'll take time, but you're getting stronger. Grace nodded, though her eyes were tinged with uncertainty. It's because of you, she admitted. I wouldn't have made it this far without your help. And Lucas, he's happier than I've seen him in years. Daniel rested a hand on Lucas's shoulder. He's an incredible kid, but this isn't just about helping. It's about making things right. I wasn't there before, Grace, but I'm here now, for both of you. Tears welled in Grace's eyes, but this time, they were tears of hope. She reached out, her hand trembling as she rested it on Daniel's. Thank you, she whispered. That night, as Lucas fell asleep in Grace's hospital room, Daniel sat quietly by the window. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose, one rooted in family, not business or success. Their family wasn't perfect, and the road ahead would be long, but it was theirs. Together, they were building something new, a foundation of love, trust, and hope. And for Grace, Lucas, and Daniel, this was only the beginning. The day Grace was discharged from the hospital was warm and bright, a stark contrast to the challenges they had faced over the past weeks. Daniel stood outside the hospital doors, his sleek car parked nearby, ready to take Grace and Lucas to his home. Lucas held Grace's hand tightly as they walked toward Daniel. Mom, do you feel better now? He asked, his wide eyes searching her face for reassurance. Grace smiled faintly, her voice soft but steady. Much better, sweetheart. Thanks to you and Mr. Daniel. Daniel opened the car door, helping Grace into the passenger seat while Lucas climbed eagerly into the back. It's not far, Daniel assured her, his tone warm. You'll have everything you need, and it'll be easier for me to help take care of you both. When they arrived at Daniel's house, Grace's breath caught in her throat. The house was spacious but welcoming, filled with soft, natural light and simple decor that exuded warmth. Lucas's eyes widened as he looked around, marveling at the high ceilings and the backyard visible through the glass doors. This is more than I ever expected, Grace murmured. Daniel smiled. It's not about the house, he said. It's about giving you both a place where you can heal and feel safe. You're family now. Over the following weeks, Daniel worked tirelessly to connect with Grace and Lucas. He learned about Lucas's favorite books and the superheroes he admired. Together, they played board games, read stories, and worked on Lucas's art projects. Daniel also took time to sit with Grace, listening as she shared bits of her life, her struggles, her joys, and her dreams for Lucas. One evening, as they sat in the living room after dinner, Lucas looked up at Daniel with a hesitant expression. "Can I call you Dad?" he asked softly. Daniel's chest tightened, his heart swelling with emotion. He crouched down to Lucas's level, his voice steady but filled with warmth. "You can call me whatever you want, Lucas, but if Dad feels right to you, then I'd be honored." Lucas grinned, throwing his arms around Daniel. "Thanks, Dad." From that moment, their bond solidified. Grace watched with tears in her eyes, her heart full of gratitude. As the months passed, their small family grew stronger. Laughter filled the home, and each day brought new memories of love and connection. For Grace, Lucas, and Daniel, the pain of the past had finally given way to the promise of a bright and happy future, together as a family.